Okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
Today, we are diving deep into one of the most profound and I think genuinely surprising theological paradoxes you can find. It's right there at the core of Israel's scriptures.
Hmm.
And that is this lived, difficult tension between God's genuine, immediate nearness, the intimacy, and God's total, uncontainable otherness.
The transcendence.
Exactly.
And it's not just some abstract idea, it's a structural tension that really defines their entire religious life.
How so?
Well, how do you build a relationship with a God who is completely beyond human control, but who also chooses to walk with you, to talk with you, even travel alongside you?
Right. That tension really does set the stage for,
Yeah.
well, everything that follows.
Every single development.
Absolutely. And the
Mhm.
way people spoke about God's presence, and I think crucially, the location of God's presence,
Yeah.
it didn't stay the same.
Not at all. It changed dramatically, and it was shaped up a real historical crisis by these huge spiritual climaxes.
So our mission for this deep dive is to trace that journey. We're looking for this surprising story of divine mobility.
I like that phrase, divine mobility.
It starts with God walking in a quiet garden, and it ends with, well, with God filling the whole world.
It's a narrative built on relocation, on discipline, and then ultimately on saturation.
So let's start at the beginning. The sheer astonishment, really, of those earliest written accounts. When you think about an eternal transcendent deity, you sort of expect a baseline of distance, you know?
You do. But these sources we're looking at, they show us this profound, almost unbelievable intimacy. You can almost feel the breathlessness in the text when it describes these moments.
The word distant just doesn't work for those early encounters.
It really doesn't. God wasn't remote. God showed up.
Hmm.
And that immediately sets up this fundamental expectation for the listener. Presence is real.
Right.
But that presence always maintains its own holiness, its own terms.
Okay, so let's get into some specifics because the details really capture this. We have God walking in the cool of the garden in Genesis 3.
Which is already an astonishing closeness, a shared physical space.
But it goes even further than that.
Oh, much further. It moves far beyond just a shared stroll. I mean, think about the physical immediacy of God eating with Abraham.
In his tent in Genesis 18.
Yes, that shared hospitality. It's an act of just radical nearness.
And it gets even messier, doesn't it?
It does.
We have the story of God wrestling with Jacob until dawn in Genesis 32. It's amazing that this sacred text treats the divine relationship with such, physical human immediacy.
It really grounds the transcendent in the messy reality of life.
And then you have the pinnacle of that connection, I think, with Moses.
Absolutely. The description of his interaction with God.
That God speaks with Moses face to face.
As a person speaks to a friend.
Yeah.
From Exodus 33. I mean, that sets the bar incredibly high for what immediate nearness can look like.
And crucially, this intimacy is mobile. It's not fixed.
That's right.
Even when the people start moving, the presence moves right along with them.
God travels with Israel through the wilderness. You see it as a cloud by day and a fire by night in Exodus 13.
God wasn't geographically stuck somewhere.
No, God was fluid, adaptive.
Yeah.
And that very fluidity dictates the next huge stage of the story.
Because once you establish that God is mobile,
then the question shifts. It's not if God will be present, it's how God will organize that presence for a community that is always on the move.
which sets up our first major structural pattern, the traveling God, and the need for a kind of portable divine headquarters.
Exactly. This is where the tabernacle, the Mishkan, becomes the absolute centerpiece of their entire theological system.
So what's the deep problem they're trying to solve here?
It's a huge philosophical problem. How do you reconcile a mobile, transcendent, holy God with a nomadic people who need, central direction?
And the genius of the solution was that God chose a tent.
A portable sanctuary, not a permanent monumental structure?
The design itself is a theological statement.
Well, it says so much. God chooses to dwell in this Mishkan, which is designed to be taken apart and carried. And, critically, the 12 tribes pitch their own tents around it.
Ordering their whole community structure around this visible, moving pillar of presence.
So it's not just some efficient design for desert life. It locks in a crucial theological pattern.
And what is that pattern?
It's the defining pattern. The tabernacle affirms that God dwells with his people right in the center, not high above them on some distant mountain.
And not contained by them.
Absolutely not contained by them. This insistence on portability establishes the foundational, non-negotiable rule that Israel has to remember.
Which is?
Sacred space follows God. God does not follow sacred space.
That is such a fundamental distinction. So even later, centuries later, when the massive permanent temple is built in Jerusalem,
Solomon's Great Monument.
right, even then, Israel always kept that memory that God chose mobility over a monument first.
And that memory is like theological armor. It prevents the people from making that dangerous mistake of, localizing God or domesticating God.
It preserves that divine transcendence.
Because God remains fluid, relocatable, and independent. God accompanies, but is never, ever absorbed into human culture or geography.
So we have this pattern, a fluid presence structured through a portable tabernacle. But that fluid pattern, it hits a catastrophic wall.
A crisis that shatters the entire reality of Israel's relationship with God's presence.
It renders the temple empty. I'm talking, of course, about the Babylonian exile in the 6th century BCE.
The exile wasn't just a political or military defeat. It was a comprehensive theological catastrophe. They lost everything the divine presence was supposed to protect.
The temple, the land, the monarchy.
And, crucially, the visible glory. The whole structure that held that tension between nearness and otherness. It just collapsed.
For the people taken captive, this must have felt like an ultimate crisis of sovereignty.
It looked like their God had either been defeated or had abandoned them completely.
So how do they process that?
The religious leaders, the post-exilic scribes and prophets, they interpreted that loss very, very severely. They concluded the catastrophe was the direct result of idolatry and boundary collapse.
Meaning they'd mismanaged God's nearness.
Dangerously mismanaged it by collapsing the distinction between the creator and the creature.
So if that was the problem, mismanaging nearness, what was the theological course correction?
The response was radical.
Yeah.
It wasn't to abandon God. It was to intensify divine transcendence and double down on a strict, non-negotiable monotheism.
Keep God separate, safe from human pollution and manipulation.
Exactly. And this meant that their deeply held prophetic hope that YHWH himself would eventually return to Zion and restore the temple, that hope had to be theologically disciplined. It had to be restrained.
So they still longed for it.
Oh, deeply. But they became extremely cautious about how and when that return could happen. They realized the old mode of direct, immediate presence had failed.
And a new mode was needed to avoid repeating the failures that led to exile in the first place.
Which brings in this whole era of what we call mediated transcendence.
That's a key phrase for our listener. Let's really unpack that. Mediated transcendence.
Right.
This wasn't God just withdrawing entirely. It was about establishing regulated, maybe safer modes of involvement. Is that right?
That's exactly it. They developed disciplined ways of affirming divine involvement without violating that intensely guarded transcendence of God.
So instead of a direct physical appearance,
Agents began to function as regulated conduits of divine fluidity. We see this in the increasing prominence of angels and more abstract concepts like wisdom, word, Torah, glory or kavod, presence, and name.
And just to be super clear for you listening, these were not replacement gods.
Absolutely not. They were often hypostatized, which just means they were given a distinct, almost personalized existence, but they remained mechanisms.
Ways to speak of God's action in the world.
Without collapsing that critical creator-creature distinction. Divine fluidity was regulated, and the grand return of YHWH was, in a way, postponed. It was refracted through these agents and future hopes.
Let's focus on one of those key agents for a moment, glory or the kavod.
Mm-hmm.
What exactly is the kavod, and what did its absence feel like to the Second Temple Jews who rebuilt Jerusalem?
Kavod literally means weight or heaviness. But theologically, it's the tangible, visible manifestation of God's personal presence. It's the sheer weight of God's reality.
It's what filled the tabernacle at its dedication.
And Solomon's temple.
So when the Second Temple was dedicated, decades after they returned from exile, what was missing?
The temple stood, worship resumed, God was believed to be active, but the climactic signature sign of divine return,
The kavod.
the overwhelming kavod that once filled the sanctuary, as it's described in 1 Kings, that manifest indwelling of glory did not happen.
And that must have left a profound spiritual and emotional vacuum.
A huge one. The longing for YHWH's return became disciplined, intense, and really focused on this one missing sign.
Okay, so you have this theological world. It's cautious, it's disciplined, it's waiting for the kavod to finally return to Zion. And here's where it gets really interesting, because into this deeply disciplined environment, a new movement arises, early Christianity. And it makes a startling, radical claim that God has acted again.
They claimed that the era of mediated transcendence had reached its end.
But not through a bigger temple.
No, not through rebuilding at all, but through a radical, completely unexpected relocation. And they use explicit theological language to connect this right back to our first structural pattern.
The Mishkan, the tabernacle.
The Mishkan echo is unmistakable. It's the key to understanding their whole claim. When the gospel says the word became flesh and dwelt among us, the Greek phrase for dwelt.
Eskonison.
Right. It literally means pitched his tent or tabernacled.
So the claim is that God has pitched his tent once more among his people.
Yes. But this time, the sanctuary isn't made of fabric and wood and gold.
It's made of human life. The relocation is total.
And this solves the problem of both transcendence and nearness. The crucial point here is that the apostles didn't abandon monotheism. They didn't discard those disciplined agents of mediated presence.
They identified them.
They identified them and claimed they were all concentrated in one single place.
In one person.
Exactly. What had been carefully distributed across angels, wisdom, word, glory, presence, Torah, all those regulated ways of talking about divine involvement,
Was now gathered into one person who is the embodiment of that presence.
Jesus is presented as the fulfillment of that dispersed presence.
So that is the radical retrieval of the two motifs that have been held in suspension since the exile.
Divine fluidity is restored. God is once again mobile and present as a living, speaking subject.
And the long-awaited return of YHWH has happened.
The missing kavod, the visible glory that was absent from the Second Temple, it hasn't failed to return. It's been relocated.
It wasn't waiting for a building.
It was waiting for an embodiment. So the story of presence moves from a small traveling tent to a massive stationary monument, and then, startlingly, to a living human being.
But if the tabernacle was the traveling sanctuary and the temple was the monumental stationary one, the biblical story doesn't even stop there, does it?
No, it moves beyond even the embodied presence.
Because the ultimate trajectory of God's dwelling is universal.
That's right. If the whole goal was to teach humanity how to host divine nearness without collapsing into idolatry, then the final stage has to be one of absolute integration.
So you mean the final vision isn't just a restored Jerusalem with a brand new temple?
It's far more radical than that. In the eschatological hope of Revelation, the final vision of God dwelling eternally with humanity shows that there is no temple at all.
So what does that mean for the story of divine mobility? If the ultimate sacred structure, the temple, is gone, does that mean God is finally distant?
It's actually the complete opposite. It means God is not absent, but that the presence has moved from being bounded and contained to being utterly pervasive, unhindered.
The sacredness isn't in the architecture anymore.
It's in the very existence of the world. The narrative moves from a walking God to a traveling God in the Mishkan to an indwelling God in Christ, and finally,
To a world that is saturated with divine glory.
yes,
That shift from a specific bounded space to a boundless, saturated presence, that is profound.
it is.
The ultimate lesson of this entire journey, then, it isn't about God withdrawing or being difficult to find.
No, it's about God patiently teaching humanity how to host that overwhelming nearness without destroying themselves through idolatry.
So the post-exilic restraint, the tightening of boundaries, relying on intermediaries like wisdom and word.
Those were not failures of faith. They were necessary disciplines shaped by trauma and a deep, deep longing. They were preparing humanity for a final, permanent stage of dwelling that is total and unmediated.
And the narrative climaxes when that long-awaited presence returns, not just to visit creation.
But to dwell with and within it forever. The journey shows that God is always defined by a willingness to dwell. The boundaries were only there until the nearness could become permanent and pervasive.
Which leaves us with a final provocative thought. If the story culminates in the saturation of glory, if every sacred boundary is ultimately dissolved because the presence fills everything, what specific implications does this journey, from defined boundaries to total saturation, have for how you view the sacredness of space in your own life today?
Something to mull over.
Until our next deep dive.